Good evening, how y'all doing tonight? I'm the Jazz Shepherd. My name is Dan. We're here to talk about part 2 of my series that's covering 1955-56 and seeing what each label did comparatively to try to get a grasp on what each label's modus operandi was, what was their driving force. And we covered Blue Note last week, and it's a pretty amazing debut, you know. Moving on to Prestige, which is probably the second greatest label of this era. And we'll get right into it. The biggest difference for me between Prestige and Blue Note, this is Bob Weinstock now, and there's a little old Jewish guy. And Bob is much more conscious about the bottom line, and that's the bottom line. And it impacts the music in a lot of ways, and ways I can illustrate for you how clearly Prestige's motivations were different. They didn't pay for rehearsal times. They erased alternate takes and recorded over them. They were known as the heroin label. People came in, got their money for junk, and left. They released multiple greatest hits, compilations, repackaged records over and over. They were pretty conscious about making money and capitalizing on any possible money-making field in jazz. The thing they were less conscious about was just the artist being the artist and allowing them to develop a cohesive sound and a feel to a record. And it leads to an overall lack of consistency in their releases. There's not an overall nudging of what Prestige is doing in these early years. There's 67 albums that come out on Prestige in the 7000 series here in 1955-56. And it's a pretty wide range of stuff. A lot of it's going to come from the earlier, late 40s, early 50s, 10-inch era, 78 RPM era. They seem equally focused on that stuff as they do on the modern stuff that's happening at the time, which some labels are stuck in the past. You know, look at Sadboy coming up, and they're very stuck in the 40s. But when you look at their roster of 40s artists, you can see why. Prestige has some great West Coast stuff here in the beginning. Guys like Getz and Konitz, Mulligan. They got some great hard bop stuff with the Miles and Rollins. And then they've got just a wide range of stuff that doesn't really have a cohesive feel to it at this point. Even up to 7067, they're still repackaging stuff from earlier in the decade, putting it out, having people have access to that stuff. All that being said, it's still probably the second greatest label because it's consistently recording black artists and giving them opportunity, which not a lot of the other labels around the country were willing to take those chances. And they may not have even been the greatest players, but they have the most desperation, the most pain, the most hunger, which is what fuels the expression and the emotive nature of jazz. Jazz isn't about the scales and the notes and how innovative I can be with my arrangements even. Jazz is about when I'm given the time to express how I feel, can you feel what I'm saying to you? Can you hear where I'm coming from? And when we stop listening to notes and start feeling color and start feeling emotion, that's where the secret of jazz lies. You know, it's easy for me to say that. It's harder for me to express it to make people understand. But there's 3 major brushstrokes that I use to help me understand what a musician is saying. And number 1 is their environment, what they were born into, what they were brought up in. Number 2 is their experience within that environment, their parents, addiction, wives, children, lovers. And number 3 is their personality. How did they handle their experience within that environment? And a guy like Mobley, the smiles on his face on his album covers tell you something about his personality. A guy like Miles, you can tell he's a somber dude. He's a little bitter, he's a little angry. I think Miles resents the low class that America saw him as, regardless of his middle class background. And I think it was harder for him to be just relegated to a second class citizen. And I think there's a lot of resentment in his playing, a lot of anger and of that darkness, which is why when he pairs with Coltrane, it's so powerful, because you have this light and optimism of Coltrane coming at you and being balanced with this darkness and pessimism of Miles, and that's always a magical formula when you can put light and dark together in the same skin and let them hash it out. And Coltrane is a powerful force, even all the darkness of Miles, and Wayne Shorter as well. Wayne Shorter, again, we'll come to that later, but Shorter was a great counterbalance to Miles' dark, I feel like. All in all, Prestige is a great label. Their art direction is inconsistent. Some of it's great, some of it's very dated. I believe Reed Miles did some of these covers as well, the guy from Blue Note. It wasn't just a Blue Note guy, he was a freelance art guy. But what Riverside does here in this early part of the decade, it doesn't compare. And Savoy stuck in the 40s, Bethlehem's very white. So what you got from Prestige, in spite of Weinstock's compromises and in spite of Weinstock's underlying motivation, he was still very important because he allowed a lot of great guys to record. And one of the things you also notice from Prestige is that they're not really having a lot of interest in the guys from the Bird, Dexter, Gillespie era. They're not really focused with that. They're more focused on what they put out on their own label early, and then just kind of following the trends and trying to make a buck. All in all, great stuff. You can't go wrong with anything on the Prestige 7000 series, especially these first 5 years. But be careful, because they will repackage stuff at you constantly, and you'll buy a Rollins or a Monk record or a Miles Davis record in the 7400s or 7500s and think you got some rare thing, and it's just something that's been put out 3 different ways. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed part 2. The Jazz Shepherd will be coming at you next week, probably sooner than with my next volume, because Riverside's a short one. Part 3 is coming soon. Stay tuned. Please give me your comments. Let me know what your favorite record is from this part of the Prestige catalog. Tell me what you love. Tell me which ones of these you've never seen. Here's one last thought on this series, is there's stuff in this stretch that a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with. And unlike the Blue Note, what you saw in part 1, we've seen all those titles. They're all pretty familiar with us, but who here has seen some of these titles? Like the Sanford Gold record, I've talked to guys who've listened to jazz for years who've never seen it or even heard of it. So that tells you something about the Blue Note's consistency. Is the legacy of each release on Blue Note is so historic and iconic. And Riverside does pretty well. It's the second best thing, I think. But it's not Blue Note, but it's still great. It's Jazz. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Peace. We'll see you next week. Y'all have a good night. Be safe. It's snowing up here in Minnesota. I'm fighting a bit of cold, so pardon my allergies. Talk to you soon. Good night. Peace.